The one thing that will mean the difference between your success and frustration levels when working with Flash is your ability to understand the timeline. In this tutorial, I'm going to try to cover all the basics, so keep coming back to it until you feel comfortable. Before we go over this area of the timeline, let's look at the player controls. Down here, we have the ability to play our animation one time through. We can step back one frame and forward one frame, or go to the last and the beginning. This is really helpful when your project gets to be like 600 or 700 frames to be able to use these player controls. We also have a looping feature, which will allow you to loop whatever frames are in this shaded section. So if I hit return or enter on my keyboard, it'll keep looping those frames. This is great for troubleshooting, and if you see any kind of jumps or bumps or what I like to call hiccups in your animation, this allows you to keep seeing it over and over again until you can isolate what's happening to it. In order to stop this, click enter or return. Now you can adjust what frames will be looped by moving it this way, the left and right areas. Hit return or enter and it's going to keep looping those. I'll shut that off and turn onion skinning on. Onion skins are great because they're showing you the in-between frames. We are the keyframers in Flash. We create the first keyframe and the last keyframe, and Flash will create all the in-between frames that make up that animation. So if I hit return, that's going to show me all of this, and I can scrub it, which of course it's not letting me scrub it, but now I can see all those in-between frames. If I go to onion skin outlines, it's going to do the same thing except for all those in-between frames are in outline form. If I choose edit multiple frames, that's going to let me edit the beginning or ending keyframe simultaneously. Last, let's talk about the frames per second and what frame we're on. Again, this is only 24 frames, so sometimes you don't really need this. But if you scrub your playhead, this is going to show you what frame you're on. And I can click in here and type a frame, and it's going to jump me to that frame, which is great, again, if you have like 700 frames. Now for here, we have a frame rate, which is frames per second. This means that at 24 frames, a second of your animation has gone by, and that's what we're seeing here. This is the elapsed time. So at this point, it's at 0.2 seconds in time. As with all of these, when you hover over them, you have the ability to scrub it, so change things that are in here. Actually, I'll go back to 24 for that one, or I can scrub this one, and that allows me to scrub the playhead as well. Same thing for the seconds. Now, before we start talking about these actual properties on the timeline, we're going to go to this pop-out menu and choose large, and that gives you a bigger preview of all of these frames. And I encourage you to kind of look through these and see what other options you have here. Usually I work in normal, but if I have a really long animation, I choose tiny, and if I have really short, I choose large. So what we're seeing here first is empty frames on this side. These are light gray or white, and they are showing a grid, and this just means there's absolutely nothing on these frames on this layer past frame 24. Over here, we kind of start seeing solid colors, and that's letting you know that there's something happening on these layers. I can turn the visibility on and off of each of these, and I can lock each of these so that I don't edit them or modify them accidentally. Now when I'm looking here, this first identifiers layer, it's gray. So think of gray as concrete, meaning it's not moving. It just sits there. And right now, this whole frame, everything lasts for 24 frames. We have our first keyframe where we see our first new artwork, which is all the text and the lines. And then that artwork just lasts all the way to the 24th frame, where we see something called a stop frame. It's a little white hollow square or rectangle that lets you know that the artwork that was immediately to the left of it and the first keyframe to the left of it has stopped at this point. Then we have all these layers which are showing the three different types of tweens. We have a basic motion tween, which you're going to use the majority of the time. Then we have a shape tween, which will morph a shape like a green circle into another shape like a yellow star. And this only works with shapes. You're not going to use these a lot, but it's good to be aware of what it looks like. And you can see with kind of older tweens they have this line and arrow saying we're moving from this keyframe to this keyframe. And then this one is called a classic tween. It does the same exact thing as a motion tween, except for the motion tween is more versatile. These classic tweens are what we used to call motion tweens in CS4 and earlier versions of Flash. But now with the new motion tween, we've renamed this the classic tween, and we don't use these a lot. You can use these for things called motion guides, which are great, but in general, you're probably going to be working with the motion tween the majority of the time. Now down here we have a new layer, a new folder, and delete. So this is where you can delete layers, create new layers, or organize those layers to keep your timeline as clean and organized as possible. If I click new layer, you're going to see that you can come here and you can name the layer. So I can call this one actions. And actions is a script that controls your project. And I'm going to add a stop action here so it stops looping. If I preview this, you can see that it just continues to loop. But Flash automatically adds as many frames as the longest layer on your timeline because it assumes whatever you're creating, you're going to want it to happen at least as long as the longest thing, or you're going to want to have it at least that long and maybe even longer. In this instance, if you don't want all these other frames, you can select these frames and delete them. Selecting things in Flash is kind of hard because it makes a difference whether you've clicked on it once or whether you've clicked on it twice. If I click off of any of these frames, then just click and drag, that's going to highlight or select frames, which is great. But if I click and let go, and then I click and drag again, now we've created weirdness because this means it thought because you clicked and then you clicked and moved it again that you were selecting that frame and then you wanted to move that frame. So I'm going to undo that with Command Z or Control Z on a PC. And if you want to select and you forget that you have to first click off and then click and drag, what you can do is select the first frame, hold the Shift key on your keyboard and select the last frame, and then that will give you a whole span or highlighted selected area. And now I can right click on this and choose remove frames, which we don't need to do in this instance, but you can. But a right click, don't forget that you have that right click option, even if you're on a Mac. You have this right click option because you have a lot of features. You can cut frames, you can remove frames, you can copy motion and paste motion. There's a ton of stuff you can do with this. So another thing when it comes to moving things around is if I wanted this frame to be at the very end, I wouldn't do click and drag because again that's highlight. But this time I do actually want to move it. So I can click and then I can click and drag and move that down. So now that keyframe, which is what we call a blank keyframe because it's hollow, that means that we know there's going to be a change in action. There's going to be something new, either new artwork or new actions or whatnot, but we haven't added it yet. So that's called a blank keyframe. And by moving that over, I'm going to add an action here that'll stop it. But what if I decided my animation goes a little bit too quickly? Well, I have some options. I can come to frame rate and I can change it to, let's say, 12. So that's 12 frames per second. So this should last for a little bit under 2 seconds. Let's watch that. And it does slow down, but it does get kind of jerky and choppy, which is what I don't want to have happen. So I want to keep the smoothness. Let's go ahead and change that to 24 frames per second. But I actually want to stretch out how long each of these animates. With the regular motion tween that you're going to be using a lot, all you have to do is hover on the outside edge of the left or right, click and drag, and that allows you to stretch it out. As you can see, my second keyframe, which is shown by this black diamond, and that is a keyframe for a motion tween, it's just saying there's a change in property, and the property in this instance is the XY coordinates. That moved it to that end so that it goes a lot smoother. So if I watch that ball, that blue ball, that animation is slower but still smooth. For the shape and classic tween, it's a little bit different. You have to click on the last keyframe and then click and drag that last keyframe. You can't stretch these ones out. So I'll click and then click and drag, and those will make them last. As you can see at this point, my identifiers go away, and that's not something I want to have happen. I want them to be on there the entire time these things are animating. So I just want to add more time in which it lasts. So I could come here, select it, and then click and drag it, and that's going to add more time. But as you can see, it adds another keyframe. So I'm going to undo that, because basically I just want it to last for longer. So I can go to Insert, Timeline, and choose Frame. So that's going to allow that to sit there for all of these motion tweens. Let's go ahead and watch this. It's still smooth, but it's a lot, I mean, we can take it in. It's not too fast. Let me change this back to a normal size, and let's talk about what happens when you want to move tweens over. And you're going to want to do this because sometimes you want to make room for new things you're adding at the beginning, and sometimes you realize, oh, things are overlapping. Whatever reason you want to move it, it's okay to move it, but you have to do it in a specific way or select it in a specific way. So if I want to move this guy, I'm going to double click. A motion tween, you can click and double click in there, and it's going to highlight the whole motion tween, and that's talking about the new motion tween. So let's say I want to move this down to frame 5 so that it doesn't start immediately right away on frame 1. If I want to move the green shape tween over, it's a little bit different. I have to hold or click the first frame, hold shift, click the last frame, and then move it all over. I can't double click. And then again, if I want to move this one, click, hold shift, click the last frame, and then drag it over. So we're going to have to do some cleanup. You can see all of a sudden we have these empty frames here, which is perfectly okay because nothing should be happening at this point for the classic tween. It starts on frame 95 now, which is how I want it. But I want this blue circle to end all the way at the end of the animation. I don't want it to go away, which is what it's doing now. It'll go away, then that one will go away, and then that one, and it'll loop back. I actually want it to last until this point, to where my last one comes in and stops. So I'll click on that frame and again do Insert, Timeline, Frame, and that's going to make it last. And this one's a little bit different for the shape tween or these original kind of tweens. I can go to Insert, Timeline, Frame, but then it creates this broken tween because it's looking for another keyframe so that it changes from this to something else. So I'll right click in here and choose Remove Tween, because I just want it to look exactly as it was here for the rest of that time. So again, I want the identifiers to last for the entire animation, so I can click on the frame I want it to last to and hit F5, which is the same thing as going up to Insert, Timeline, Frame. And then the last thing is I want this very last blank keyframe to go to the very end, and this is where I want to create action script that tells it to stop at this point. So I can go up to Window and choose Actions, and then I'll go to this plus, and oh, I forgot I'm in CS3, so let's just type this out. The action script for this is stop, open and close parentheses, and then a semicolon, and I'll close that. And you can see on that particular frame, if I make it larger, on this particular frame, you can see a little A, and that tells you that there's actions on that layer or on that particular frame, and that's good. We want that action there. We want our actions on the timeline on an actions layer. But if you start seeing little A's all over the place, then that's a visual indicator that there's actions on there and you need to delete those actions. So now I can kind of lock these so I don't mess them up, and watch this. And it comes in and it'll stop and just last while the other one comes in, and then the last one, and then it stops. It doesn't loop at all. So it's really important that you understand that selecting things is a little bit different. If you just click and drag, it's going to highlight, but if you click and then click and drag, it's going to move things around. You can right click to remove frames, remove tweens, all that good stuff, and then being able to manipulate the controls down here will help you to get through it easier.